You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaffe.
And me, Danny Denhard.
And in an illustration of the world of AI, we're recording this on Tuesday, the 18th of November. And as we came into the pod today, Cloudflare is down. So any ChatGPT or Claude users will not be using those tools this afternoon. Gemini seems okay, Dan, but it's an illustration of perhaps still how fragile that infrastructure is, isn't it?
100%. You always know how fragile the Western web is when Cloudflare goes down or AWS goes down and half the web doesn't work and no one really knows with confidence what's going to work and what isn't. So I've already had a number of different messages saying my site's down or, oh my God, I can't use X or Twitter. So where's anyone going to complain? It's probably LinkedIn, right? But yeah, I think this shows the direction of travel maybe for how delicate the internet still is and how AI could make it worse.
Yeah, you never know. Anyway, at the moment, we're all good here. The tools we're using are all working, so we're going to crack on. And Dan, I think we're going to talk today about what makes a good AI workshop. Both you and I have run AI workshops extensively this year, and I think it's probably quite useful for people to understand why we do those, how we do those, what to expect coming in, and what a good AI workshop looks like. Whether somebody's using an external source to do them like you or I, or whether they're trying to do them internally. Let's just talk around the structure of the workshop, and maybe that's going to give people some good value around how we do that.
100%. When people sort of reach out and ask questions around enablement or workshops, it's really interesting to see how at different stages people are at in their flow and in their journey. And it's always interesting to see the comparables to some of their team members. So I'll give you an observation. Almost all of the workshops, there's always someone that says, we're out of 10, we're a 5 or 6, and we just want to know what tools should be used, when we should use them, and what are the pros and cons of using AI. And what I love doing is sending a form over to them with 5 to 7 questions to really understand where they're at, what role they have, how they're progressing, and what tools that they've used. And what that enables you or I to understand is what they're up to, what they've used, and how they've really structured their AI journey, and then really understand what sort of tools or problems they're trying to solve. Something I always ask, and a question I always ask up front is, what problems are you trying to solve? Because that always tells me any ongoing issues that they might have, or any workflows that they might have tried to create in the past or have tried to implement. It just hasn't been something that they've really thought through. Therefore, they can't really choose the right tools or the steps on their journey to go through. So a lot of people have always say, oh, I've tried using ChatGPT 4, or I've tried to use a workflow tool, N8N or make.com, to optimize our ads. And then you understand where they've got to and how they've got to it, and then how they've stopped and how they haven't tried to push through. So when I'm coming up with the workflows and the workshop, I take all that into consideration and map it out. Is that the sort of similar thing to what you do, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things people coming in. One is a real common conversation I've had with all sorts of organizations this year of all sorts of sizes, is they have a feeling that the world is really getting on with this stuff and they're not. And I've had that a lot of times. It's like, actually, when you talk to organizations, like you say, there's usually mixed people in there. Some have been playing with it, some not. But many of the organizations I've dealt with this year are broadly in the same sort of place. They've been experimenting, they've done some stuff, they need and want to do more, but they feel like, oh, everyone else is really getting on with it and I'm not. And I think going back to a point you made in a podcast a couple of months ago around, like, people put very impressive dems out there and it all looks very flash, but actually what people are doing tends to be a bit further back down the track than the stuff that maybe you see being demonstrated online. So the first thing to say is, I think lots of organizations I've worked with are worried that they're behind the curve, and they're not necessarily. And the other thing I'd say, which aligns with what you said there, is I would say in any given group of, say, 10 to a dozen people, there's going to be 2 people who haven't touched it. There's going to be 2 people who are all over it. And there's going to be a bell curve of experience in between. And, I've done workshops this year with people who are ex-Google DeepMind in the room. I've done workshops with people who've already written their own AI agents to book holidays for them. And then at the other end, there are people who literally have not logged on once to ChatGPT or Gemini or any of it. And so the work that we do, some of what we're doing when I do workshops is practical. That's the very first time they've used any kind of AI tool of any description. So I think you're right. I think the kind of, okay, where are we with it and what are we trying to achieve is an important place to start with that conversation. And it quite often is reflected in the way I said, in that people have not gone as far as maybe they think everyone else has gone. And there's almost always, in any group of 10 people, there's this distribution of who's really getting on with it and who hasn't started yet.
My favorite thing that happens in workshops is the people who just don't like it and just don't want to use it. And I've had it a number of times, whether it's a larger group or a smaller group. And there's always one or two that just don't want to use it. And you kind of have to tell them how they've used it already and highlight where it's been used in the tools that they use most. And I try and come up with equivalents. So I try and say, well, actually, do you know that the CEO of the Atlantic, who's a journalist by trade, uses it in this way? He has a podcast on it. He shares it all the time on LinkedIn. Have you thought about when the last time you used LinkedIn, almost anything that's on there and any recommendations in that feed is from AI? When you use YouTube, 80% of the recommendations and the supporting videos, recommended videos, are all AI driven now. So often it's trying to give people a grounding, but also give them examples of where they're impacted every day in their lives. And although it's something that I think most of the listeners will say to themselves, well, I'm listening to the podcast, I kind of want to get into it. I think if you're going through a similar struggle or some of the team members just don't want to use it, I find 5 or 6 backups that help cement why people are using it, how customers and competitors are using it already, and how it's got them ahead really does help them understand the reason why so many people are using the AI term AI pilled, and why so many people and so many CEOs are really pushing it hard. So I'm pretty sure you've had a similar experience, or those people who just aren't interested at all. How do you get them even remotely inspired or interested, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to say. One is, you're absolutely right. Actually, what I do, it literally in the first 5 minutes of any workshop, we just do a couple of minutes on the history. People are quite often surprised to realize that there's been experimentation in AI for about 60 or 70 years now. The early experiments were in the 1950s, 1960s. People are surprised to hear that. And then, as you say, you go into a discussion of the fact that AI has been in all our lives for 15 years at least, because, to your point, every movie recommendation that Netflix makes, every playlist that Spotify builds, every YouTube video that, as you said, every Facebook algorithm, LinkedIn algorithm, we're all hitting AI every day, even those who think we're completely not involved. So then we go on to talk a little bit about, so what's changed with the new generation? Where did the transformer stuff come from, GPT, and what does that mean? And that's why it suddenly appears to be everywhere, but actually some of these technologies we're all using. And I think if you've got somebody who's if they're reluctant, generally I think people are a little bit scared of it, is where the reluctance comes from. And I think it's about meeting them where they are. So where's the use case for them? Is it okay, let's stop work a minute, but you're really into, I don't know, you're really into baking. So let's get AI to come up with some really good baking recipes. You tell it some things you'd like to, and it'll tell you how to do it. Or you're really into the holidays. Okay, let's get to recommend, tell it a little bit about yourself and get to recommend a couple of great places. Just get them to use it in some way that is relevant to them. And then, you can move forward from there. But it's very rare that people are that resistive. I think you get people who are very hesitant, but it's very rare that they're kind of arms folded resistive. I think they're just a little bit worried about it sometimes, is my experience.
Yeah, what I often try and do in workshops is get a fun exercise in early. So get them guessing prompts or get them guessing how I've created certain images or videos. And then one that I've just started to introduce is true or fake. So is this something that AI has generated, or is this something that I created myself without any AI help? And I actually think that is one that when I've did a test run, it went down great. And actually, some people have a real knack and an eye for AI, and other people will have no idea. To a point, I'll share it in a WhatsApp group sometimes and just see how people respond. And it seems to be particularly good with animals, for instance. So it's very good at taking an image, turning it into a video, and actually creating something there. So that's one of the fun exercises. Another exercise I like to go through is what a company wants versus what they need. So go through that and then do a sort of a demo or get them to come up with the strategy using AI for like a make believe competitor that might be coming out or might have just hit the market or could come out pretty quickly. So that's one that people really thrive in because it's baked in their work. They can apply who they are and what they do, and then it gives them a chance to excel and get that hybrid AI to get the AI to help them get the best outputs as possible. And it gets people working together and collaborating. Very often, you will see people that don't work together frequently, but from much bigger orgs or businesses, because a lot of the time is they'll jump into the job that they do, and then they'll work out how to navigate the different options and the different ways to use different tools, and they learn as they go, as opposed to a lot of workshops you go to and you don't actually get to use the tools. They tell you to go away, try it, and then come back. I much rather get them using the tools and using the services all together collaboratively as soon as possible, just to give them the feel like they're making something and they're collaborating on it.
Yeah, and it's also, I think that's exactly where you get the real breakthrough stuff. Is it like you? I build in exercise time into the workshops I do. Like you, I think it's great when you see a room full of people and then you get somebody from marketing and somebody from support together on something, or somebody from finance and somebody from operations working on something. And what I'll do is I'll design exercises that are relevant to the workshop I'm doing. So if it's a company, we'll design stuff relevant to that company. If it's a section of business leaders in the, I don't know, finance sector, I'll design exercise relevant to their world. But then what's really great is you see them start to spin off sideways from that. So they do the exercise, they promptly get some answers. That means there's curiosity built and they start to explore those answers. And then you really get engagement and you get real progress. And that's really good fun. I think it's great to see that happen with people, especially if, as you said earlier, it's somebody who's a bit worried about it or they've not really touched it before. You see them realize the potential. And I think so to do that. And then also a really great thing to do straight after that is to bring them all back together and say, what have we learned? What surprised us? You know, what are we going to do? If you're going to take one of those things you've just done and teach everybody in your department next week, what would it be? You know, what can you share? So it's you can see really people switch on and a lot of value out of actually doing the practicality. And I think a lot of that is moving people. I mean, you and I do a lot of marketing workshops. And what I'm trying to do for me is I'm trying to move people from what they might well already have done. So they might well have used it to create content. Like, okay, write me a blog post, write me an email. And they've done one or two other things, but they've not really gone really sideways and say, well, why don't you get it to be a worried customer you know, a 27-year-old woman in Madrid who's about to buy your product, but is a bit worried about this. What are her concerns? What things does she need to hear about your product? Is that, you know, it's really starting to explore what it can do and how it can help you think and plan and all those sorts of things. So, yeah.
I love that example of basically creating a customer or creating an experience that the whole business is going to be impacted by. Because I think very often, as you said, you and I do a lot of marketing. I do some on the product side as well. And what I find a lot of the time is with marketeers, you get into muscle memory quite quickly and you end up doing a lot of the same stuff that you've always done. Whereas like you, I either put them in a customer scenario or situation, or I get them to try and vibe code or create something that's like a landing page they can spin up really quickly that helps them create a campaign that doesn't overly rely on cross-functionally. So they could create something that would be ready to go from a technical perspective, whether that's a landing page, whether that's a microsite, or even going to the point of building a campaign from start to end. And you can do that so quickly now. I know that's a podcast we're going to pick up, but that's definitely something I have found drives people from just thinking about where they would use it, in where they could use it, to where they're going to use it, and they can almost get a head start on like having a prototype, so they could take it to a tech team or a product team, and then work their way forward to deliver something that is really rewarding and takes away a lot of the emphasis away from the cross-functional friction that comes up from working together.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things for me. Yeah, what am I really trying to do when I'm workshopping with people? I'm on a mission to make people self-sufficient. Point one. So I understand that out there are various organizations offering AI as an outsourced service right now. They'll do your AI for you. I think that's the wrong approach for just about every business on the planet. I think it's so intrinsic that you should look to be self-sufficient. So I'm on a mission to help people get to be self-sufficient. How do you start that process, whether it's with a medium-sized business or with a department in an enterprise? Well, the first thing you've got to do is you've got to get everyone to a baseline. So you've got to educate them to a baseline so that they're not frightened of it. They're comfortable with it. They've seen what it can do. They've played with it a bit. But then I'm hoping to do a bit of education, inspiration stuff as well, so that by the end of the workshop, they're comfortable with the baseline. They've got some frameworks about how we're going to do this, and they're kind of educated and inspired to go on, as you say, experiment and take it back to the department and try things and share things, because that's when you really get the magic happening. So for me, that's an important part of the workshop, is to get people to be at a baseline, educated, inspired, ready to move forward.
Funny you said educate and inspire. I've got EIE, which is one of my frameworks, which is educate, inspire, entertain. So if you do one
There you
or
go.
two or three of those things, then I think actually you're answering so many of the questions that people need, especially if they can go off and entertain themselves or entertain other people with it, because that's often the unlock that no one really talks around.
That reminds me of, was not the BBC's mission originally, when the BBC was set up 100 years ago, was educate, entertain, and inform was there. So EEI
Ah.
was there. That was the three. They said everything we produce must either educate, entertain, or inform, or more than one of those. The other interesting one I've done a couple of times recently is to sales teams. And again, sales teams are possibly one of the more resistive elements to AI originally. So you sometimes get a number of sitting there with their arms folded type people. And you sometimes get people who are saying, I've been selling a long time. I don't need, I know what I'm doing. I don't need anything new. But again, it's one of those where if you get people to experiment with the things it will help them do, suddenly they see the value and away they go. And I think sales teams are one of the kind of most binary in my experience of being probably amongst the more resistive people to use it. But then once they start using it, they're probably some of the most passionate converts to it. And we talked on other pods about the things you can do from a sales point of view. I think it's a really, really interesting workshop to run with sales teams.
That's one of the sides that I personally have found interesting, but a little bit more challenging, because the tool sets are different and very much they're like a force fit. So it's kind of square peg, round hole often. With they're trying to find the tools that they have used, or they're going to try and use the same sort of functionality from what they have done before into something that could be a different use case or an extended use case, but they kind of want to stop it halfway through. So that's something that often, especially like with Gong and those types of tools, I find that a lot of people in sales want to like do a start stop. They want to start it, but then when they can't understand it, or it's different to how they work, they stop using it. And often it's a case of finding the right tools and the right processes and trying to help them understand that it's advancing them as opposed to stopping them from it. It's not a hurdle. It's it's a door that they can unlock. They've got the key whenever they need it.
Yeah, and I think there's two or three. I mean, what comes to mind as you talk there, like you say, there are sales-specific tools built already, like Gong, tools like Yahoo, where they are specifically aimed at salespeople, and they are call coaching tools, or they are meeting coaching tools. So they're quite interesting. You've then got some of the sales technology that's being built into existing platforms, like HubSpot Breeze, like Einstein from Salesforce, where they're building big AI capability into a tool you're probably already using. And that's got tremendous strength. Again, it's an interesting thing for salespeople to look at. I'm not sure lots of people are. And then obviously there's a thing that you can make Gemini or ChatGPT do, where you actually use one of the LLMs, but you can use that to help you, plan calls, analyze calls, prospect. There's all sorts of things you can get that to do. And you don't have to go that far into thinking about how you do the prompting. The prompts don't have to be that big and clever. But again, it's an area that saves lots of time and gives you lots of leverage, call analysis, all sorts of things that insights it will give you if you're a salesperson, you're prepared to engage with it a little bit more.
I know we've talked around, and I've really championed Notebook LM, but I've found just giving people the opportunity to work with it, use their own data with it, and then just give them ideas around how they could use Notebook LM just to do a lot of those things you said, or surmise something, or create in a different format that's a little bit richer that they can go out and use, or be inspired to use some of the language, I find gives people that additional leg up, and it also gives them the confidence that they're not giving away some of their competitive edge. They're actually taking it as like an optimization section of it and a tool that they can use to really progress.
Yeah, agreed. One other area that comes up a lot, Dan, well, actually two, but one that comes up I'll talk about now, which is quite often there's a conversation around how do we implement this on a company-wide basis? From leaders, quite often it's like, okay, how is there some framework, playbook about how I go on about? It's great having people play with it, but have we got some kind of a structured approach to that? Do you find that question coming up?
I do. My answer often is it comes back to like what we want versus what we need. And very often I will set homework and say, here are some exercises I want you to complete, but post workshop. And the reason why I want them to do it post workshop is they can go away, digest it, and then apply it to their own way of thinking, and then say, hey, here are like 5 or 6 ways we could start using it. Also, what that enables people to do is give them the distance to think this is actually going to either benefit me or benefit us. And so I'll give you a couple of real life examples. One of which is I make them attribute captains and champions. So captains are like a rotating role that people have. They go out and then they can go and captain a movement towards using some of the tools or some of the workflows that they want to come up with. And then the champions are the ones that educate everyone else around them. So they're the ones that are going to champion the change, champion the technology. And what that enables everyone to do is feel part of the ownership and co-ownership. And then everyone has to collaborate with it. So that's one side. Another side is here are we talked around agentic quite a few times. An exercise I get people to go through is through their user journey and their user map, mapping out the user journey and then actually breaking down where they could improve it with AI and where agentic is either going to really upset them or really optimize the way that they work and get them to really map that out. Then that enables them to come out with and say, hey, we're going to do these 3 or 4 things, look for the right tools, the providers, the right partner, and then they're set up for 3 to 6 months ahead of where they're at right now, as opposed to feeling like they're only, they've got 3 or 4 things to do in the next few weeks. I want people to feel like they're future proofing and they can really attack where they may be struggling or they wouldn't necessarily think about it off their own back. So give them exercises that they're going to probably undertake in the future, maybe 9 to 12 months, but I try and accelerate that ahead for them. How do you tackle it, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, I agree with your champions idea. I think it's, you're going to get in any workforce above about 20 people, even maybe less than 20 people, you're going to get 1 or 2 people who really grab it and run with it. And you should make them your champions. They should be the people who are kind of the people championing the stuff. But in line with what you're just saying there, one of the things I think is really important is to have some kind of process, some kind of, like in any other business initiative, we quite often I see businesses say, no, we've got people playing with it, experimenting with it, but they're not really, they're playing. And I think you just got a little bit of discipline in there to say, okay, let's just look at this department and let's look at where we think it can make a difference. And let's do sort of a hypothesis of that. So let's say, okay, here's something that's going on in the business. We think we could use AI to do these 2 or 3 things here and save 10 hours a week maybe by doing that. So that's the experiment we're going to run. We're going to try it for a couple of months. We're going to develop out or use the tools, buy in the tools, whatever we're going to do, try that and then see what happens. And then at the end of that, we make a judgment. Like with any other business initiative, we're going to try it, measure it, see what happens as a result of it, and then move on from there. And I think just bringing some very scientific discipline, nothing too heavy, just a scientific method or a discipline to the way we do the experiments and saying, what is it we're trying to do? How are we going to do it? How are we going to know if it's worked? Right, let's try it. And there we go. So that's one of the things I think is important when you're implementing. And you may do that by running pilots. You may do that on a department by department basis, but just to have that method so it's not as random as everyone play with it and see what happens. And the other point I would make that sometimes surprises people is I think the real wins with this stuff are at departmental level. So if I'm sat with the board of directors of a large organization, the chances are that the people in the room are not the people who are going to see the real benefits, because the people nearer to the coal face are the ones doing the work. They're the ones that can see where the opportunities are, which is why it's important to get this technology into their hands, get them trained to a point, and get them to be suggesting the experiments, because they're the people doing it all day to day. They'll come back with the things that might be useful to do. Now, that's sometimes a mindset shift for board directors that they struggle with a little bit. But it's important for me that you put the technology in the hands of the people who can see where it can be used quickly, and they come back with the suggestions. And then the board's job is to coordinate and approve that stuff, provide the resources where needed, and hold them accountable for the measurement.
Yeah,
exactly. So that would be, I'd say there are a couple of things that I'd add to what you said.
Yeah, I think if you can't push the leadership team or board level to be the top-down leaders on it, it'll be start, stop. And very often it'll be, we take one step forward, we feel like we're going to take two steps back once we don't have a full product sprint, we don't have a full campaign, or we don't have a full quarters of use cases where we've done it and collaborated on it. So I often try and say to the most senior people, if you're not leading this top down and you feel like it's the most important thing to change within your organization, then everyone in your business is going to struggle to implement this properly. So I try and ensure that anyone super senior is the champion and advocates positive change and talk about it confidently, as opposed to just pull it on and make up some of what other people are doing and giving a story, as opposed to actually fully feeling it and being energized by it.
Well, yeah, and I think you bring me to a nice point there, Dan, to sort of round up really. Is purpose of the workshop, as we said, is to educate and inspire everybody. So get them playing with the tools, get them understanding what the tools will do. But I think the underlying piece for me, and the reason that the workshops are evergreen in my mind, is what I'm as interested in doing is some of the philosophies that need to be adopted. So at a board level, it's okay, the technologies may change on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, but actually, what are some of the philosophies? What are some of the principles that we need to adopt as an organization that will sustain? They're the kind of underlying philosophies, the underlying approaches, the underlying frameworks that we're going to use as a business, on top of which we can drop any AI tools we want, because we've now got our manifesto and our approach to AI. And I think that's the important piece of the workshop, is to have those things that are evergreen, that are going to be true whatever happens, and that we've got those set up in the business. And then the business is inspired and educated to go and experiment. So, I think it's a really interesting thing to do, whether people do them internally, whether they, ask somebody like you or I to come in and run those workshops for them. They're a very good way of taking the pulse of where you are as an organization right now, and a very good way of getting everybody to a point where they're all agreed. They'll agree what the problem looks like, for want of a better expression, and they're all inspired to go forward.
Hopefully this will inspire a lot of people to go away and either kickstart it themselves, or, like you said, hire someone like you or I, or both of us, to run these workshops and help galvanize some change, and also really bring the teams together, because ultimately that's what a lot of the companies and departmental leads really need, is that glue to stick things together. We've given everyone a lot of food for thought, and almost a complete framework to go off and try it themselves, or give us a call.
Sounds good. Good to see you, my friend, and I will see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aimoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.